Can you please mute yourselves? Thank you. Okay, let me just check that everything's all right here. Yes. Welcome, and it's good to see the faces I can see. Again, I would encourage you, if you feel comfortable doing it, to allow the camera to work for you, so that I can be surrounded by faces rather than by boxes. I want to start by making an announcement about this class. This class is sponsored in memory of Fred Goldsmith and Doris Leader Goldsmith, Uri Shraga Ben Chaver Yehuda David de Clara, and Rezo Dina Bat Yosef Veroiza. I remember this wonderful smiling couple whenever they happily came to learn Torah. And the sponsors for the year are their daughters, Faye Sultan, Maureen Friedman, Rosie Lennon, and S.D. Martin, and families. That's the announcement. I also wanted to say again that if you feel that you would like to write afterwards to raise questions or to add observations that you have had up on thinking about the class, I'm very happy to receive these communications, and you can get my email. I think it'll be posted on chat to facilitate this. And now we really start the Torah in a sense. What we have this week is Parshat Lech Lecha. And Parshat Lech Lecha is the beginning of the Jewish story. It's the beginning of the story of the Jewish people. The father of the Jewish people. Actually not the father of the Jewish people, of Hamon Goyim. Why is his name changed to Avraham from Avram? Avraham means Av Hamon Goyim, the father of many nations. Now that's already, it sets us back on our heels when we hear that. He is not only our specific father, but there are many who trace their paternity in one sense or another to this man Avraham. But our specific story begins here. And I think one of the amazing things is that the beginning of the story is clearly that sudden call of God, Lech Lecha, get going, go forth. It's hard to find an English translation. Lech Lecha, literally, go for yourself, go to yourself. But no one sensible translates it that way. Also, we will be translating it in the end, something like that, because we're not so sensible in this class. So what we have here is the beginning of Abraham's story with almost a blank slate behind him. We don't know anything, very little anyway, about his background, as we say. It's true that there is an introductory passage at the end of last week's parsha, the end of chapter 11, which tells us about his family of origin, very briefly. And from that passage, we learn two main facts. One is that Abraham has no children. We are told who he marries, and we're told that she is barren, ein la valad. Now that's a very intimate piece of information to be given right away. Before we even hear anything about Abraham as a person, we know that his wife is barren, which means that he has no children. Now we have to deduce that. That means he is childless. And this is by contrast, and it's just there in the text, with the description of the genealogies, the 10 generations that have passed since Noah till we get to Abraham. And the information we're given about every generation is most important. Thank you. The most important piece of information we're given is that they had sons and daughters. Each one, that's the end of the description of their lives, that they lived a certain number of years until they had a particular child, the child of destiny, the one that we're going to follow through the generations. And then they lived another number of years, and they had more sons and daughters. So they were all prolific. They were all fruitful. The world was filled with them in the end, until we get to this most significant name as far as we're concerned, Abraham. And here we're told in a kind of almost devious way. We're not told, and he had no children. We're told she had no children. His wife, Sarah, was barren, and she had no children. And then we're left to deduce and wonder, does that mean he had no children? Did he have concubines? In any case, the way he enters the story is with a kind of oblique sense of not having. We're not too sorry for him because we're not told clearly that he had no children, if you see what I mean. But we understand that there is something missing in the story. Everyone has children. That's the one thing that everyone knows how to do, apparently, throughout the generations. And that's the important thing, because if the world is to come to be recreated after the flood, then you're going to need generations, fruitful generations. And here is Abraham, and it's like full stop. This is where Abraham begins and ends. And where does he begin? We're told a little strange vignette that his father took the family and started traveling from Ur-Kasdim, Ur of the Chaldees, towards Eretz Canaan. But he didn't go all the way, and he stopped at a place called Haran, and he stayed there. His family called a halt. They pitched camp, and they didn't go further. So again, we're told a story of a kind of frustrated intention. They intended to go to Eretz Canaan, but they didn't, and there's no explanation given. So it really, there's two negatives here, two senses about Abraham, that the family is somehow foiled, checkmate. They didn't go all the way, and they didn't have children. He personally didn't have children. And this is the man, and this is the only information we have about him, to whom God addresses suddenly and says, Lech lecha. Lech lecha, go forth, me'artzecha, me'muladetecha, me'bet avicha, from your land and your birthplace, and the house of your father. I won't comment too much on all this. In other words, making it very clear all that Abraham is going to leave, what he should leave, and where is he going to go to? El ha'aretz asher areka, to the land which I will show you. In other words, no precise information about his destination either. So we know almost nothing about his past. All we know is the names of his family and what didn't happen before the story starts. We know nothing about his past, and even the future that God suddenly accosts him with. God suddenly says, no, I want you to start traveling. And in that context, then, what we read is then a series of blessings. I will make you into a great nation, which clearly is something that Abraham needs very badly. It's a way of saying, I'll give you children. It is a way of addressing what Abraham doesn't yet have. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great. V'heye racha. So after all these blessings, there is a commandment. V'heye racha. So really, what's the information he's received here? Start traveling. I'm not telling you where. It says to the land which I will show you. It's a way of saying, I'm not telling you where you're going. You'll find out. So it's a bit of a tease. It's a bit of a, it's somehow luring Abraham onto a path whose end he doesn't know. So it's something mysterious, frustrating. We'll see what Rashi says about it. And this open-ended path, and there will be all kinds of blessings. And then there's one more commandment, which is be a blessing. It's a strange way to frame a commandment, to become a blessing. To whom? What does it mean that you will not only be blessed, but you will be a source of blessing? You will be a source of blessing. Okay. So what do we have now? Have a look at Rashi on your page. Rashi gives us a very famous classic commentary here. What is that strange word, lecha? Go to you. Go forth. I think the English translation would like to translate it. Just to give a little more swing to the word go. Not just go, but it's go, lech lecha. What is lecha? And here Rashi classically, famously, translate the word for you, lehana'atcha u'letovatcha. This journey will be for your benefit and for your benefit. Yes, two ways of saying benefit. For good outcomes. It will be good for you. That's a wonderful blessing. Lech lecha, it'll be for you. It'll be good for you. That's the gist of it. For instance, you travel open-ended. When you arrive, and I'm not telling you where, I will make you there into a great nation. Here, you will never have children. So suddenly there is this sense that God is provoking Abraham. He's enticing Abraham to go on the journey by saying, look, you'll get children. What a reward for the journey. When you arrive there, you will have children. And here, you will never have children. So it's almost like a magical offer. It's like a magical promise that you have in fairy tales and in legends. You know, you could go and do this clearly difficult thing of going on a journey. Going on a journey is not a small thing in those days. And I suggest that it never is. There are very important things that one gives up when one travels, especially when it's not a pleasure trip, but when one is simply wandering aimlessly, not knowing where one is going from one place to the next, which is the nature of the journey that we're talking about. And here then Rashi makes a very strong claim that gives us an entree into the story. I will make you into a great nation. That's the reward for the journey. Why does God make this promise? Because in general, haderech, the journeying, traveling, goremet causes three things. It has three effects usually. Mema'etet priya urevia. It diminishes fertility. It diminishes your financial standing. That is, it's not a good opportunity to earn what you need to earn if you're always on the move, if you're always traveling. And it also diminishes Hashem, which you can translate the name, meaning your renown, your fame in the world will be diminished. If you have to travel off into unknown regions, then no one will know you, and you will travel without a sense of having a local reputation, which is part of what keeps a human being going in the world. You know, you need children, you need money, and you need a sense of being real in the world, having a social world, as we might say. And here Abraham is being asked to do something, travailing, right? Yeah, there is a connection between the old-fashioned word travail and travel, which tells you how traveling was considered till very recently. But traveling is considered a pain. It's a very difficult thing to be doing. One has to give up all kinds of things. And here, precisely these three areas that you are giving up, I'm going to bless you, but you won't have to give anything up. On the contrary, you will be the gainer from going on this journey. So here God is addressing Abraham, and he's saying to him, I know what you really need, what's important to you. And you won't lose. In a sense, you will just be back to square one. Up to now, you didn't have children, and you will have children. All right, well, cancel out that minus. There was a minus child there, and there will be a plus. Right? Now you will have a plus child. There's a danger of less fame and less money, and we'll cancel that out. It's not such an incitement to go on the journey. And what is become a blessing? Become a blessing, Rashi translates it, now blessing is given into your power. Now you will have the power, you will have the possibility of blessing others. No one before you has had that power. I blessed, God says, I blessed Adam, I blessed Noah. You find it in the text, God's blessings of Abraham and Noah to be fruitful and multiply and so on. And now I'm blessing you with blessing. That's the acme, that's the climax, that you will have the power to bless others. And in that sense, you will be able to bless whoever you want. That's a real power. Yes. But isn't it strange then that that's not listed as a blessing? It's listed as a command. Heye bracha. It's not, I will give you the power to bless. It's be a blessing. As if that's the job of Abraham's life. That's his project now, to become someone who can bless others. God is potentially giving him that power. But actually, he is the one who has to make it happen. The Heye bracha. And Rashi doesn't address that aspect that has to do with Abraham, the imperative on Abraham, as it were. This is what he has to do. But meantime, what we have here is a sense that Abraham is engaging in a difficult enterprise in going on this journey. And in some way, he has to be coaxed into it. And moreover, go to the end of Rashi, right at the end of number 1, Lo gila lo haaretz miyad. Go and I will show you when you've arrived. God did not reveal to him that his destination was Eretz Yisrael, in order to make it precious to him, in order to make him feel something, chiba, in order to make him feel a certain kind of paradoxical love for this unknown destination. I'm not telling you, and that will arouse your imagination, your curiosity. It will, in a way, make you eager to carry on with the journey, just to find out what is it that God has in mind. In other words, I'm evoking your agency. You see what I mean by agency? I'm evoking your active desire in wanting to know where you are going, rather than just knowing, as part of your itinerary. End of itinerary, I'm going to Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Canaan, and checking that off and saying, oh yes, that's where Abba was going. That's where my father was going all along, and he stopped halfway, and now I'm going to complete the journey. What would have been wrong with just saying that? Surely that's the most, in a way, that's the least anxiety-provoking way to go on a journey. At least you know where you're going. Yeah, you don't know exactly what's going to happen to you on the way, but at least you know where you're going. So perhaps you might say that not telling him where he's going is not just making it precious in his eyes, it's actually tantalizing him. It's in some way tormenting him, because there he is traveling, as the Midrash says, like a madman. That's what people are saying about him, according to one Midrash that I find very, very expressive. Tir'u zaken zeh. Look at this old man, says the Midrash. I haven't got it on the page. Look at this old man. Have you ever seen anyone traveling and not knowing where he's going? Just traveling and without knowing where he's going. Tir'u meshuga zeh. Look at this meshuga. Look at this. It's actually the meaning of the word meshuga is someone who's wandering. Shogea. He's all over the place. It means that the needle of the compass is swinging wildly. Doesn't seem to be aiming at any kind of true north. That's the condition under which Abraham is traveling here. God didn't reveal it to him, his destination, on purpose. And the idea is here to make it more precious to him. And there will be another Lech Lecha, as we remember, in Abraham's life. And that one will be a really tormenting one. This is the one that opens his life, and that is the one that will end the story of Abraham as we have it in the Torah, when God will say to Abraham, Lech Lecha, go forth and take your son, your only son, yes, whom you love, Isaac, and offer him up as a burnt offering. There too we will have a Lech Lecha, and we will have something unknown about the commandment. That is, God delays telling Abraham who is to be the object of the sacrifice. Your son, your only son, the one you love. What is the effect of delaying telling him the essential piece of information? And Rashi says here, and it's rather strange, in order to make the commandment more precious in his eyes. I don't know if that's exactly the way I would put it. If I'm being told that I have to kill my own child, and I don't get to know, at least for a few precious seconds, exactly who is meant. But the idea somewhere of involving the subjectivity, the curiosity, the selfhood, right? The personhood of the person that God is addressing here. So that is the project that's now facing Abraham. And it will all be for his good and for his benefit. The Zohar, on the other hand, gives us a different translation for Lech Lecha. And it's significantly different. What the Zohar says is L'tikuncha u'legormecha. Go for the remaking of you, the perfecting, the changing, tikkun, everyone knows the word tikkun, yes? For the correcting of you, for the perfecting of you in some way. As if you're not quite mitukan now, you're not quite the thing now, something is missing in you, and this journey will put you to rights. It will, in fact, create you. Ligrom. Ligrom means to cause you to come into being. It will bring you to be the person that you don't know that you are not. Does Abraham know that he needs perfecting? Does he feel there is something in his life that needs to be transformed? Well, presumably he knows that he hasn't got children, and he knows that's a very severe, I would almost say, a trauma. That there must be some kind of trauma in Abraham's life if he doesn't have children. Right? Something is missing. What is wrong with me? Everyone else has children. Right? That's what everyone's procreating without any problem. And here I am. It seems to be the end with me. And God says there will be a reassemblage of the parts. In some way, you will be put together better as a result of this journey. And here is that the meaning is not you'll get to your destination and then magically everything will be fine. It really means that the journey itself, the act of journeying, of traveling in this strange, unresolved way, that's what will bring you into being. Whereas up to now, you have in some way been, I'll use the word traumatized. Something very serious has happened to you or not happened to you. There's some kind of gap in your life that maybe you're not fully aware of, even yourself, right? Because that's the nature of trauma. And God is implying to him, Lecha, Lech Lecha, go for the making of you. Sometimes we say this in a rather light way when young people go off on their dream journeys, after the army journey or before the army, after the army journey here in Israel. There's a sense of it'll be the making of you. That's the dream. That you will, in some way, all your inexperience and your rawness, somehow you'll meet many people and you'll become more, you'll become better. And that's the function in some way of all these brachot. But the Zohar, I think, goes in deeper. L'tikuncha u'legormecha, as if you are not really you at all yet. And you don't really know yet what it is to be you. And that's of the very nature of trauma, I want to say. That what makes a trauma is it's not just a painful episode in one's past. Painful episode in one's past. If one remembers the episode and one's aware of its pain, we don't usually call that a trauma. Strictly speaking, psychoanalysts call a trauma if the past pain has in some way been absented from you, that you don't really realize it. You've been through something so bad, so inexpressible, that you can't actually engage with it. In some sense, you've forgotten it. You've repressed it, Freud would say. And those are the things that really need healing, because they're the things that are stopping you unawares from becoming you. And so I'm suggesting, and I know it's a bit of a long shot, I'm suggesting here that by the Zohar is raising the possibility that the purpose of this journey is not just that it'll be good for him, it'll benefit him. He's really fine, but this will just be even better. But that there's really something missing in Abraham Of course, one clear clue of this is the fact that Abraham changes his name, that God tells Abraham to take on a new name at a certain point, from Avram to an additional letter, the Hey. And one of the classic understandings of this, what is the meaning of Agadla et Shemecha? I will make your name longer. I'll make your name greater, bigger, more substantial. Rashi there in number 1 actually says it, Agadla et Shemecha, somewhere there. Does he say it? Maybe not. No. A Hey will be added to your name. What is that Hey? It is 5 extra organs to your body. Now that's very shockingly physical. It's as if there are certain organs of your body that will suddenly they will come into view for you. Suddenly you'll become aware of them. You'll focus on them. And that's the eyes and the ears and the nose, strangely. Actually, I'm not sure I got that right. The eyes and the ears, and I think the sexual organ. Yes, I didn't check on that. Your sexuality, your senses, will suddenly become yours. You'll take ownership of them. Whereas up to now, you've been perhaps like everybody else. Somehow, you had no ownership of your sensual, sexual being. Something like that. And you aren't aware of it. You don't even know what might be. Now, that's one very specific understanding. Or the Zohar itself says, I will make you into a great nation. What does that mean? I will make you is translated, I will create you. I will recreate you. I will create you as a new creation. You will find out what it is to become new, to become transfigured, somewhat unconsciously. That is, without really knowing what you're looking for. Just by experiencing this journey. Just by going on this journey. Now, so 2 different understandings of the word lecha. One thing I do want to point out, if you're thinking of Abraham's experience, is that if he's traveling to a place whose name he doesn't know, have a look at Ramban in number 2, you can see there, to the land which I will show you. What Ramban says here is that he started traveling towards the land of Canaan, because after all, that was the direction his father was going in. But he didn't yet know that that was actually the land of his destination. So he started traveling and traveling. And what happens then is that he goes through many countries and many kingdoms. Ramban in a different passage says he's traveling all over the place, and he's traveling, as he says actually at the end of this passage here, he's traveling like a lost lamb. Hayatoe kase oved. Suddenly there's a very poignant, pathetic description of the difficulties of Abraham's journey. That there's a great anxiety about being lost. Now, he hasn't got a sense of the thread of his destination. And so he's just, every day he gets up and, where do I go now? It's like a lost lamb. And Ramban says in a different passage, he uses this image of the lost lamb. I think, again, please mute. Yeah. The lost lamb, to give one a sense of the poignancy of this part of Abraham's life. It wasn't an easy thing to do. The last words of the last psalm, Ta'iti kese oved. The psalmist cries out to God, I've been wandering like a lost lamb. Bakesh avdecha. Find me. It asks God, find your servant. Look for me. I'm lost. And you can tell where the destinations are, but I am a human being who is enacting sheer lostness. And suddenly we have a sense of Abraham not just as a happy traveler, was singing Schubert on the way, but as someone who is suffering what it is to not know what it's all about. In other words, he's a person who is in the grips of some kind of human trauma. And that's what makes him interesting. He's not just anybody. He's somebody who is capable of this kind of anguish, of knowing that he needs to know more, that he needs to be in contact with a destination and with a sense of purpose in his life. And with this, let's have a go now and have a look to number 3 on your page. The Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. What we can see here is that this anxious Abraham, who is quite, in this sense, he's quite conscious of his anxiety, is now described in the Midrash. If you look in the language and the imagery of the Midrash, not philosophical language. God said to Abraham, Lech lecha me'artzecha. These are our opening words. And they're surrounded with mystery. Why did God say these words to Abraham? What did he mean when he said, I want you to go on a journey that doesn't have any clear destination? And here the Midrash opens up and quotes another verse, another text from the book of Psalms. Shim'i bat uri'i, listen, O daughter, and see. V'hati oznech, and incline your ear. V'shikchi amech uvet avich, and forget your people and the house of your father. Now notice, people, house of your father. There are some resonances there with the Lech Lecha command, which is go and leave, travel away from your family and the house of your father, all your environment, all your attachments, and the house of your father, which leads the Midrash, evocatively, associatively, to quote this verse from Psalms. And so here we have a young woman who is being told, leave everything you know, leave your family, and forget them. And suddenly it's pushed a little further. Leaving means then forgetting, shikhi. That is, leave all that behind you. Leave your relationship with your father behind you. And that is in the context of going to meet her future husband, in the context in Psalms. This is your young, every woman, right, in traditional times, well, if she was going to get married, certainly if she comes of noble stock, if she is aristocratic, she very often has to, have all her asses and her horses saddled and full of a gorgeous trousseau, and she will travel off to meet an unknown husband, to encounter him and to marry him. And that is the poignant feminine situation, the situation that women knew all about, having to leave everything that is the furniture of my life, the meaning of my life, and go off into an unknown future with an unknown husband, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. What is this like? Here you have Abraham is like this bride. Right? Strange comparison. Abraham is, after all, clearly masculine. Why compare him to a young bride? He's a father of Hamon Goyim. He's destined to be a father. Meantime, he has no children. But that's the story of his life. But suddenly he's compared to a woman. And then we are led further astray on our journey. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. What is this like? A parable of someone who was traveling from place to place. And he saw a castle on fire. Bira Doleket. This is the famous midrash that begins the midrash on Abraham. He saw this castle on fire, and he said, Tomar, would you say that this castle is without anyone in charge? Below manhig. And so suddenly you put yourself into the mind of this traveler, this unknown traveler, who is traveling from place to place to place to place. And that's the feeling you're supposed to get. From one situation to another situation, a makom, a place of kiyum, a place of being in the world, some kind of meaning. And he sees this castle on fire, and he says, would you say that this castle is without anyone in charge? It's a question he suddenly asks himself. Would you say this? In other words, he seems to be troubled. He sees a castle that is burning up, and no one is in charge. No one is making any efforts to put the fire out. So it looks like an abandoned castle, a castle that's shortly to be in ruins. Hitzitz alam balabira. The owner of the castle then peered out at him. Hitzitz, wonderful word in this context. This kind of glancing movement from the owner of the castle. Their eyes meet. And he says to him, I am the owner of the castle. Anihu balabira. Cut. And go back to our original story of the bride. This has been a parable for that story. So when Abraham, our father, was traveling, he was constantly saying, Tomar, would you say that this world is without anyone in charge? What Abraham sees, his experience of the world, is of a castle on fire. It has all the promise of being very, very opulent and gorgeous, but it's simply burning down. It's burning down with lust and ignorance and hatred. And you can go on with the list. He sees a world about to destroy itself. There's no one in charge. Would you say that? Clearly, on some level, that's what he thinks. There's no one in charge because no one is looking after the world. On the other hand, by saying, would you say that? It's almost as if he's struggling against the obvious meaning of the burning castle. The obvious meaning is that there's no one in charge. What else are you going to say? It's all meaningless. Nothing is in place. Nothing is as it should be. All the promise is being burnt up. And at that moment, God peers out at him. It sits alav hakadosh baruch hu. This is most beautiful. Suddenly, it isn't looked at him. A glance is perhaps the best. We talk now about the male gaze. Yes, idea of a gaze. Well, this is a little more sharp. It sits. Suddenly, there is that glance, and says to him, "I'm the master of the world. I'm in charge of the world." And that's the moment of Lech Lecha, according to the Midrash. When God says to Abraham, start traveling, what is really meant by this? What's meant by it is that Abraham meets God, encounters God, at a moment of personal anguish, which is potentially a godly moment. It's as if Abraham hadn't had that question in his mind, would you say that the world is without anyone in charge? Then God would not have answered the question. But because he had the question, because he himself is burning up with some kind of deep turmoil, that he asks the question, cries out, would you say that the world is without anyone in charge? That's when God looks at him and says, here I am, Anihu balabira. And nothing more than that. And then we go back to our bride. We return with all this imagery back to the bride. How does that text in the book of Psalms continue there? Forget your family and go off to an unknown destination. V'yit'av hamelech yosech, and the king will desire your beauty, for he is your Lord. You will find your place. You will find, right? Here, this is politically incorrect for us. It's not so easy for us to read this, but this traditional young bride is being told, you will find your Lord. You will find the man who will give meaning to your life, and he will desire your beauty. That is, you will encounter a whole new world in which your beauty will become important in a different way, and in which there will be desire, and there will be an erotic life, and all that is unknown to you up to now. So you don't really know what you are traveling towards, right? Somewhere, what is being held out is something that all the people who are in the know, who read the Midrash, they nod their heads. They say, "Oh yes, we know exactly what she's going towards." But she herself doesn't really know. Doesn't have any meaning for her at this point. And the king will desire your beauty. The verse is in the book of Psalms, and the Midrash expands the word beauty to make you beautiful in the world. The king will desire. Now we're talking to Abraham. What a strange world to insert Abraham into, that he is like a bride whose beauty will become very important in in her relationship with her husband, and that's what Abraham is like. What does your Lord, that is God, what does God want of Abraham? To make you beautiful in the world. My desire of you is that you will have a great beauty. In other words, that the whole world will know you and will be affected by you, as one is affected by beauty. Now, this is powerful material. Perhaps a philosophical translation would be, and going back to Plato, would be that the important thing about you is your wisdom, your capacity for understanding the world, for knowing what's what in the world, what is in charge, what is important in the world, and making sense of the world. And that's what the whole world will appreciate you for. That in the end, you will become, in that sense, I will make your name great, because you will teach the world important philosophical ideas that will make the world live better. You will improve the world. Wisdom here becomes beauty, which is not such an uncommon thing, because beauty is something everyone understands. You don't have to be a philosopher to understand the power of beauty. That's very accessible. Everyone knows what it is to be moved by beauty. And Abraham now is setting off in a career, and here we have layers of imagery. It's not just a physical journey, lech lecha, just keep traveling. It's a movement through bewilderment, through not knowing anything, being very aware that he's lost, that he doesn't know, crying out about the world, and then finding God, which has to do with a future, that has to do with beauty, with Abraham discovering his own beauty. Now, in order to do this, he has to forget his background. He has to forget everything he comes from. He has to cut his traces, is that the word? Cut his links with the past. That's the bride. Forget your relationship with your father. Now it will be a translation of that relationship. It'll be a different version of that relationship. Right? It's a Freudian, in a way, a Freudian transposition. What is the mystery here of Abraham's existence? Abraham is now thrown into mystery, and it's a necessary mystery. He will have to now go through life in the world until he gets to a point where he will cry out. Now, the crying out actually seems to have happened before the story starts, because this is God's response. When God says to him, Lech lecha, God is responding to a level of anxiety and outrage in Abraham. This is who Abraham is. He can't bear it. He can't understand how the world is working. It seems to be working itself into an early end, into another flood. It's called a fire this time. It'll be not water, but fire in this imagery. Ramban, in the passage in number 4, if you look at next passage, Ramban is troubled by something else about the lack of information about Abraham. What is the point of this journey, he asks. After all, we are not given any sense of meaning about the purpose of this journey. Is it just, all we're told really is, all he's told, is that he has to leave the place he's in. Since when is that the subject of a religious odyssey? Normally, a human being in the Torah who is told to do something very positive with his life is told things like Hayeh Tamim, become perfect, for instance. It's pointed out to him that he has to transform himself, he has to transfigure himself. Hitzchalech lefanai v'tishma b'koli, walk before me and listen to my voice. Ramban quotes many other cases where people are told to go on religious quests, and there religious spiritual language is used. Here, it's just a physical matter of leaving his place. I don't understand, he said. I don't understand. There's no rationale for this. Matam, what is the reason? What does God mean by saying, Lech lecha? Just get moving. Just ba'avur yitziat ha'aretz, right at the end of the passage there. Is it all just, in order to, the command is to leave the land that he's in? In botam. That doesn't mean a thing. I can't understand that at all. So the spiritual purpose of this journey is not made at all clear. Aside from that, there is the question that seems to trouble everyone, and that is, who was Abraham that God chose him? Why did God say to Abraham, of all people, you are the one that I want to go on this special journey, which will lead to many things? We don't know anything about Abraham from his background that can lead us to think that he was a worthy address of God's mission. So let's now have a look at the Rambam and then a very different explanation of who Abraham is, what his background is, and why God addresses him in this way. Rambam, the philosopher, gives us a sense of the development, the early life of the young philosopher, Abraham. So let's have a look at the beginning there. When this giant, as he's called, he is to become a giant, a person who's larger than life. When he was weaned, we go suddenly back to this giant in infancy. How did he start out? What are his origins? It's something we often want to know when we talk about geniuses. How did they start out life? What was the beginning? He began to wander around in his mind while he was still little. Vahu katan. There's something very intimate and almost childlike in the telling of the story. He began to wander around in his mind, because that's the important part of a person. He began to explore and ask questions about things. He began to think by day and by night. And he began to wonder, how is it possible that this sphere, this Galgal, keeps turning and there's no one to turn it? In other words, for the Rambam, for Maimonides, Avraham is our version of the Aristotelian question of Aristotle, who asked the question of what makes the world move? What makes the world function, go round? There has to be a prime mover. Right? There has to be an original, and that's his name for God. God is that, the outermost circle that makes all the inner circles keep moving. And so that is, in a way, a quest for the original being, the original power. And the philosopher finally arrives through the working of his own mind. Please read through the Rambam in English or Hebrew. I won't read through the whole thing. Abraham, in this case, thinking in his mind, he arrives at the conclusion, the philosophical conclusion, that there is only one God, and He is the God who created everything and keeps everything in motion. And all the rest of the world are to'im, are in error. Everyone else is wrong. And what put them on the wrong track is the fact that they worship the stars and the moon and all the objects of nature. In other words, their pagan practices put them off on the wrong philosophical track. But they do all these things, and emotionally they're very satisfying to them, and that's why we come to this wrong conclusion that it's the sun and the moon and all kinds of objects in the world that actually have all the power and make things happen. How old was Abraham when he arrived at this conclusion? He was 40 years old, right? We're just about almost halfway through now. Ben Arba'im Shana, when Abraham recognized his Creator. Once he had arrived at the answer of his struggles, the answer of all his questions, he began to give answers to all the people who lived around them. He became the philosopher. He became Socrates, a kind of traveling Socrates. He, first of all, starting in his own home territory, he began to confute. That's the nice word that's used in your translation. He used to have philosophical discussions, like Plato, with people around him, Platonic discussions, in which he brought out, by asking questions, what people really thought, and then he asked them more questions to show how absurd their ideas were, that really they didn't know what they were.
Someone's not on mute, it's really distracting.
I'm sorry? Can everyone mute, please, if it seems to be some distraction? Thank you. And so, now that he's master of his knowledge, he begins to teach it. And he begins to have debates with everyone. And later on, we'll read that he has debates one-on-one with everyone, just like Plato, right? Or Plato's dialogues, in which the purpose of these debates being to teach people the truth, and to teach it by question and answer. I ask you what you really think, you say what you really think, and then I ask you more questions until I hem you into a corner, and then you realize that you have been, in a way, you're shown up as not having thought it through properly, and you are then bound to accept my superior understanding. That's who Avraham became. And at a certain point, he is so successful in his immediate environment that he is persecuted for smashing the idols, as it were, of what other people believe, what the general beliefs are in his society. And what happens at that point is that he suffers persecution, and it may be he's thrown into a pit or into some kind of a fiery furnace. There's suddenly a reference to a rather strange midrash about Avraham being thrown into a fiery furnace. I won't go into that in detail at this point, but the midrash is obviously caught up here in the philosophical narrative. And then what happens is that he leaves. That miracle is done for him, and he manages to get out of there, and he leaves and he goes to Haran. And there on his journeys, he is constantly calling out in a loud voice to the whole world, introducing them to God, to the one God, giving lectures, as it were. People gather around him in their hundreds and in their thousands, and he becomes very famous. He moves from kingdom to kingdom. It becomes a kind of triumphal lecture tour in which it's one victory after another, and he cries out the name of God. He proclaims the name of God everywhere, but it's all done through question and answer individually with people until he had got people thinking in the right direction, thousands and tens of thousands of people. That's the triumphant journey of Avraham according to the Rambam. And he planted in their hearts, in their minds, this great principle of of the one God. And then he wrote books about it as well, right? He's the consummate scholar, academic, who has to write books, who has to publish, not only teach orally, but write books. And Rambam refers, in fact, to a tradition that a particular book was a book that Avraham had written in his own time. He knew of this book, and he also, of course, taught it to Yitzchak, his son, so that it would be a live tradition. That is the philosopher. That is Socrates. That is a more successful version of Socrates, because Socrates, although he is very successful in his debates, in the end, he's executed for his troubles, because he is the nonconformist, because he is the one who wants to abolish, who wants to annihilate the false beliefs of other people. And that is a failure, in a sense. It means that he has the right beliefs, but he hasn't managed to convince other people of them. And here is Avraham, and the Rambam is setting him up as a successful version of someone who manages to escape execution, right? He escapes the fiery furnace, and he goes on his journey, and with great success. And now we come to the Me'er Shiloh. And this is the turning point. This is where I want to suggest we begin to understand Lech Lecha, not in external terms of there will be improvements to your life that can be put on your bio, yes, on your life history, that you were a successful teacher, you were a successful scholar, a philosopher, and so on. And suddenly we have something that happens in Avraham's inner life. The Me'er Shiloh, 19th century Hasidic master and commentary on the Torah, Vayomer Hashem al Avram lech lecha. God said to Avraham, go forth. Another verse. Ki etzak mayim al sameh v'nozlin al yavasha. When I pour water on thirsty ground, and liquid on dry land. There is going to be now a dynamic, something that happens, which is like the encounter between water and dryness. A dry surface that asks for rain, and the rain then comes and floods. We are picking up on themes that we talked about last week, about the rain that became too much rain in the flood, about the fact that a human being was made of a mixture of water and earth. You needed the water. I don't know if you remember this from last week, not so long ago. And here the verse of Isaiah evokes something about that grateful meeting of dryness and wetness. When Abraham began to ask and to seek after the root of his own life. Now look what a different language. He's not looking at the spheres and wondering what makes the world go around. He is looking for the root of his own life. He is a rootless person. He is someone he describes himself as Ariri when he is complaining to God later in chapter 15. What will you give me as long as I go Ariri? The strange word. It really means childless. So meaning I have no roots in the future. I have nothing to look forward to. I don't have a meaning, a purpose for my life. But it actually means having no foundation. The idea of Ariri, as Rashi says, has to do with things pulled up by the roots, as if he doesn't really belong in the world at all. And here he's looking for some kind of root, the vital root of his own life. That's strong existential language. He's looking for himself. After he had come to the realization that all the good things of the world, all the desirable things of the world cannot be called true life. That can't be what it's all about. All the physical pleasures, the sensual pleasures of the world, everything that the world regards as life, that is not real life. Now that is the movement of the philosopher and also the movement of the religious human being. The human being who looks at everything the world has to offer and is in some way rootless, can't find himself in that world. That's not what he wants. That's not what he's looking for. That's good for removing discomforts that you might have in the world. It's an interesting way of putting it. It's good to have money. It's good to have all kinds of good things, so you're not bothered by being poor. But that's not life. That's just trying to remove the hindrances to having a life. So what can life be? So God then says to him, once he has this passionate quest in himself, God says to him, Lech lecha, go to yourself. That is, le'atzmacha. Go to find your essential self, your real self. Because really the other things in the world, that's not you. That's not, you won't find life in that. Where will you find life? Ikara chayim timsa b'cha, in you. And suddenly Abraham is being told, stop looking anywhere and everywhere for the root of your life. You should be introspecting. You should be looking into that strangeness, that most strange territory that no one else apparently is interested in, which is called your mind. I'm going to translate it like that. Your own mind. And by mind, I mean in the largest sense. Your inner world, your inner being. Look into yourself. There's another quotation from Isaiah here. Va'ata tagil b'Hashem. You will be the one who will rejoice in God. The important word is ata, right? The idea of rejoicing in God, finding one's religious quest, that's all very well. But where will you find it? In your response. It's only within the world of you that you will know that you have made that connection. Zot hu hachayit. That is life. When you find something deep in yourself. That's why it says in the Midrash that we have just been reading, that Abraham is asking who is the owner of the castle. And that the owner of the castle peers out at him. Hitzitz bo. The owner of the castle peers out at him. Shouldn't it say Hitzitz alav? Looked at him and said what the owner said. I'm the owner of the castle. Why does it say Why
I'll
does
get back.
I'm sorry. Yes. Let me get that. Just it says Hetzitz alav, looked out upon him. It should say elav. It should say he looked at him. It's a normal expression. He looked at him. But it says upon him, as if what God is looking at here, what he is looking at with a very sharp gaze, is at Abraham himself. And he wants Abraham to become aware of himself. I'm looking at you. So the interest, now Abraham's interest, God is turning his interest inwards. Hetzitz alav. And Abraham saw, and here there's a very specific understanding, a tradition that says that the burning castle was actually the generation of the Tower of Babel that came after the flood, which was in danger. The Tower of Babel was in danger of being burnt down to the ground. Right? There were bricks that were fired in a furnace, and there was a fire in the atmosphere there. And now we have Abraham. In that generation, right? That's actually the generation that's just his, it's just before him. And he looks at the world at that point. He says the whole thing is on fire. 10 generations ago it was water, now it's fire. And God says to him, look at yourself. Don't look out there, but look at yourself. Halo tireh be'einecha. I'm about 4 or 5 lines from the end in the Hebrew. V'haya be'einav lepele ma'od. It was very wondrous in Avram's eyes. V'hirim b'nafsho, and he was in an upheaval. Hirim, he thundered in his psyche, in his inner world. Mi bara ela. He's asking, who created all these beings who are in such confusion, who don't understand each other's language, who are doomed to destroy themselves? He is asking the question about the burning castle. Then God, Hetzitz alav, turned his attention to himself and said to him, you are the only one. You have the ach be'einecha yipale. How can it be that there is no one else? Halo tireh be'atzmacha. Look at yourself. Gaze at yourself, because it doesn't seem to be a problem from anyone else in the world. No one is paying attention. Attention to what? Who is the world? Who is behind the world? Who is in charge of the world? Who can give the world a meaning? No one's asking that question. And what God is doing to Abraham here, the real switch, is redirecting Abraham from looking at the world or looking somewhere beyond the world, but looking back into himself and asking the question, why am I the only one who feels so uncomfortable in the world? Why am I the only one who is in a situation of hirim v'hirish, right? The idea of being in thundering and in turmoil and stormy. These are very, very existential words. This is not a philosopher asking questions. This is someone who is in deep trouble over the world and over the meaninglessness, the lostness of the world. And where is he? He's feeling that trouble in himself. And now God is saying, reflect on yourself. It becomes reflexive. Why am I the only one who feels so uncomfortable in the world, so out of place? As if all the explanations that are given in the world, of the world, simply don't make any sense to me. And here I find myself with a question that I can't answer. And God says, well, the answer is, look at yourself. Ani bal habira. I am the owner of the world. And the Ishbitzer here, the Meher Shiloach, says, really, in looking into yourself, you will realize who aroused your heart and your soul to this anguish, to the anguish of the question, of seeing a world that seems to be completely ownerless and protesting with every fiber of one's being at that answer. At that obvious logical answer. That is you. What you are becoming aware of is the you-ness of you, of what it is to be you, and to be capable of appreciating, therefore, recognizing the connection with God as it's made in you. You don't look outwards, don't seek me. Look into the depths of yourself. Look into your innermost trouble, really. And that is the meaning of alav. His very question, al-kushiyato, looking at his question, which is more than an intellectual question, his cry, his outrage, this in itself is an answer. That is a satisfactory answer for him. That is, the passion of his question is already the answer. That somewhere that will lead him into the quest for God. It won't be a matter of looking out into the world for more and more revelations of God's beauty and power. It'll be a question of looking into himself and his own deepest needs and intuitions about the world in himself. Now, that's a kind of revolutionary way of thinking of the meaning of lech lecha. Go to yourself. That is the unknown territory that is in yourself, the trouble there is in yourself. Yes. Wilfred Bion, who's one of the early great psychoanalysts, talks somewhere about the listening to a radio, and instead of hearing the Bach and the Mozart and the beautiful music, hearing the cracklings of the cracklings and the disruptions of the sound. What's the word I'm looking for? The interference.
Static.
Okay, the static. Yeah. And the idea then being that most people will just try to ignore that and hear the music. But some people will be aware of the static, of the disruption, and wonder about it. And some people, in the end, will create great telescopes, to pick up the disruptions of the world, of the universe, to pick up those sounds and pick up the sounds and understand that there are things I don't yet know about the universe that are indicated by the interferences. That it's the interferences you should be looking at. What doesn't work, right? I'm saying really the trauma. Look into your place of restlessness. Look into your place where you can't be satisfied with the indulgences, as it were, of the world. Now, I want to move on from there, since our time is moving, to another, and then another midrashic understanding. And we're going here on a series, translations of the word lecha, to yourself. Go to yourself. Number 7. This is the next midrash. God said to Abraham, go to yourself. Rabbi Brachya started teaching, as he opened up, a verse from the Song of Songs this time. Something about your oils, your precious oils, your ointments yield a sweet fragrance. Your name is like finest oils. And that's a description of the beauty of the beloved in the Song of Songs. She's being praised by her lover, and something about the beautiful perfume that she's wearing. What has that got to do with our material? Yes, lech lecha. And Rabbi Brachya now expounds. What was Abraham, our father, compared to? What is he like? We need another parable now. We're adrift now in a world of imagery, and I'm doing this deliberately because I think it's the imagery, poetic language, is the only way of saying something that can't be said in normal prose. And so what you have here is another image. What was Abraham like? Slochit shel apokil simon, like a flask of precious oil, mukefet smid batil, surrounded, right, the flask is surrounded and held in place by cotton wool, let's say, so that it doesn't move, it doesn't spill. There it is, corked and held in place. In other words, static, in a different sense, immobile. Velo haya recho nodef. The only problem is that its fragrance doesn't spread out, it doesn't diffuse into the world. So there it is perfume. I mean, you have to believe it, there's perfume in there. But since you have no access to it, It isn't really doing perfume. Right? In order to make perfume become perfume, what happens then? When it was shaken up, when the bottle was opened and shaken up, then its perfume diffused, then its fragrance diffused. So God said to Abraham, our father, Taltel atzmacha. There's that word. Shake yourself up. Taltel. Litol, the root, is to take yourself. But once you double the root, taltel, then you have something, it's a kind of agitation. It's not just take, but take aimlessly, violently, agitatedly. I have a whole list of translations here of what it means then to make yourself move around in the world. Handle yourself from place to place, and then your name will become great in the world. Your name is the perfume. That is your being, your essence will be able to affect the world like perfume. As long as you said your name, it didn't mean so much. I didn't know what the point of that was. But once you say that we're talking about perfume, then I begin to understand, right? Isn't that what the ladies at the perfume counter do when they want to assault you with perfume? You know, they want you to try out the perfume. You know, they open up and they give a little shake. In other words, it's almost like an act of violence. I want this to get to you. And out comes the waves of perfume. And we're talking here about real perfume, not the diluted versions that you can now buy, the toilet waters and all that. It's that tiny, precious bottle full of essence. Right? Almost nothing, a few drops, but a world of fake fragrance in each drop. That's what Abraham is like. And God says to him, tell. Some of my translations of this, that I got from various sources, go like this: Tel atzmacha, make yourself homeless, banish yourself, decant the perfume from the bottle. Yes, it's a state of unsteadiness, of being handled, of being restless. Tiltur, that doubling of the word tiltur. Right? These are all emotional words I'm using. An effect of tiltur that comes from swinging, hurling, right? Moving, being in exile, right? All kinds of words that cover a whole range. We seem to have. Yes. Taltel atzmacha. And then your perfume will spread around. So, something has to happen to Abraham, which involves agitation. He has to move from his place, whatever place he thought, secure place he thought he had in the world. He has to go out from there into a place where on a journey in which he'll be moving from place to place. That is, there'll be moments when he thinks he's there, he's somewhere, he's in a situation, a real situation, but then he'll be moving on and moving on. And what is all that? Is that a blessing or is it a curse? Sounds more like a curse, this kind of agitated motion. But the result will be that he will have many encounters. He will encounter people, his perfume, what he has to offer the world, will encounter people, many people, and there will be then a possibility of relationship, a certain kind of relationship, which only perfume can describe. Another way that this relationship is described is in Song of Songs also, where we are told, I'm just looking for the pasuk. A moment. Yes. Al ken alamot ahivucha. Therefore, young girls have loved you. Young girls love you. That's a strange pasuk describing Shlomo, the lover, who apparently is loved by no one who sees him doesn't love him. So he has a kind of erotic connection with many girls, which has to do with perfume in this case. That is, in some way, this is Abraham. The Midrash says, who is the one who is now lovable in the world? That is Abraham. Because he himself, it's not that he's wearing perfume, it's that there's something about the unconscious effect he has on other people. It's not just that he teaches them good, solid information. This is no longer the Rambam. This is the Midrash that is interested in a much deeper level of what makes people connect with each other. What do people want from each other? And what they want, it may be wisdom, it may be religious truth, but it has to be experienced like perfume. The experience has to be this, and now I'm more open. Now I'm more myself. Now in some way I'm being led in a direction that makes sense. It's not an experience of now I found my place. It's not a static experience. It's an erotic experience, which means that there's no limit to who I could be. It means that I have no idea who I could be. I put it in the negative. That I am, what gives me that feeling about an Abraham? Why does Abraham generate such a feeling in other people? Maybe simply because he is agitated. Because whatever is his essential being is not allowed to sit in place, but because he undergoes trouble and anguish, and he knows what is not good in the world. He's found out by experience what doesn't answer his questions. And therefore he's left with live questions and the need somewhere constantly to try to make a connection with the God who can be found in his innermost heart, that we found in the depths of his being. So in a way, it's an endless quest. His passion it's an endless passion. He will encounter God, but there will always be more. There will always be more. And so this will become like an erotic quest in that sense. And as Rashi said from the beginning, he will never know when he has arrived, where he will go, because it's actually the land where he is going. So the Ishbitzer actually says that is his passion. His passion is to arrive at a place that's called Asher Areh. That is what he's looking for is, I will show you. That is always intimations, suggestions, evocations, hints. Somewhere to learn in such a way, if we're thinking here of Abraham as a teacher, but he's never called a teacher. He's never called Abraham Rabbeinu. Yes. That will be Moshe. That's a different life. Abraham is Abraham Avinu. He is the one who will work on deeper levels of transmission, of what it means to be a father to his children and a father to other people. And then from being a father, suddenly in this midrash, he becomes perfume. The idea of something very concentrated, whose effects evoke worlds in other people. Now, the idea of affecting people by hints. Perfume is a hint of some kind. It's a hint at a world, at a certain kind of world. I wanted to quote Wittgenstein at this point, the philosopher Wittgenstein, who was asked once if he read a lot of Kierkegaard. And he says, no, Kierkegaard is very good, but he said he's too much for me. There is something I can't digest him. He says a word or two in my reading, I prefer something where a word or two is enough. That's how I read. When I read truthfully, it's a word or two gets to me, and that gets things going in me. And that's what I look for in my reading. It's not to be force-fed with a lot of material, right? There is a point in information, yes, right? But at the Avraham stage of things, it's all going to work much more by a word or two is enough. Not necessarily long lectures. Yeah? A word or two will get a process, a creative process going. And that idea of the hint, of an intimation, is there, I want to suggest, in the perfume image here. Let's go to another midrash, number 8. Another small drop, a little drop of something. That is who you are. And I didn't mention, very important. God says, Taltel asmacha, taltel. Move yourself around, agitate yourself. That is a translation. It's, I think, quite clear. That is the midrashic translation for lech lecha. Lech lecha is doubling lech, as it were. Lech lech, tel. All these words that can be doubled, what happens to the word? It fragments in a way. It vaporizes. It isn't a solid thing anymore, but suddenly it becomes something very minor and very dynamic, very, very full of life, like a drop of perfume. So that is lech lecha, be perfume. Number 8, lecha tal yalduter, another translation. To you is the dew of your youth. There is, instead of tal, it's tal. Tal is the word for dew. And that's a quotation from Tehillim. Avraham Avinu was mitpached. He was in anxiety. He was worrying. A difficult state of consciousness. He was worrying. And he said, Toma, would you say, the same way of starting a question that we had before, would you say, he's asking himself, or something strange in him is asking him, something he doesn't welcome in himself is asking him a question. It's like a stranger inside him is asking him the question. Perhaps I have sin in my hands. I still have sin in myself because of all those years when I worshipped idols. And suddenly we're back to something very concrete. Abraham, right, we know he must have worshipped idols before he found God. All those sources that say he was 40 years old when he found God, or he was in some dated much younger than that. Nevertheless, for some part of his life, he was an idol worshiper before he began to break the idols. And suddenly that comes back to him heavily. There's a voice inside him that says, would you say that I'm carrying sin around? I want to translate sin into trauma. That is, there is a certain traumatic reality inside me, which means I was an idol worshiper. That means I am an idol worshiper. On some level, that part of me didn't go away. It's in me somewhere. Right? It's a kind of psychoanalytic way of looking at things. I know about that. And he begins to be anxious about that. And then God says to him, Lecha tal yaldutecha, quoting the verse from Psalms, to you is the dew of your youth. Now we're going to stay with this for the next few minutes till finishing. The dew of your youth. Why compare your sins to dew? What kind of an image is that? Just as this dew tells it, poreach, vaporizes, flies away, so your sins fly away. That is, they become nothing. Porchim, they just fly off into the air. Just as this dew is a sign of blessing in the world, so you are a sign of blessing in the world. Tal is a sign of blessing. When? In summer. Yeah. When you don't need rain, and then you have dew. And rain would not be a blessing in summer. So the dew, what does dew do? What is the dynamic of dew? What's the blessing of dew? That it flies away. It touches and disappears. There's something very light-footed about dew. You know, there have been many lyric poems written about the dew in the morning, the dew on the flowers, and all of them emphasize the lightness of the dew, the evanescence. You know, the fact that the dew is there at one moment and it's gone the next. What kind of blessing is that? I want a blessing that I can hold in my hands. Is that I want something to come into me? No, apparently. So what is the blessing here? Have a look at the Talmud in Ta'anit. We'll need this for our second to last source, the Shem Mishmoah, Hasidic source. Rabbi Brachia says, the community of Israel asked for something that was inappropriate, but God answered them with an appropriate answer. This is from the book of Moshe. In chapter 6, the people are saying, let us know and pursue knowledge of God. His going forth is sure as the morning. Right? We want something very sure and clear. God as a presence is sure and clear. V'yavo k'geshem lanu, and he should come like rain to us. So the people asked for God as rain. God answered the people more appropriately. My daughter, you're asking for something that sometimes is desirable and sometimes is not desirable. For instance, in the summer, rain is not really what you want. So I will be to you, and then a quotation from a different chapter in Hosea, I will be for you something that's always desirable. As it says, Ehyeh katal le'Yisrael. I will be like dew. And so here we are, we have the material now for our last Hasidic reading. What is always desirable? Nothing can be always desirable, actually. I think that's a fact of the world. Once you have it, you have it. So you don't really want it anymore. So what is always desirable? And the answer is dew. And God puts that answer into the mind of his people at this point. So let's have a look at the Shem Mishmor, another late 19th century Hasidic master and commentary on the Torah. What is this analogy of the dew that flies away? Tal oref. Not tiltul, tal. And this is how we might explain it. And he quotes his father, first of all. The people said, let God come like rain to us. And God said, no, dew. Israel said, I want rain because rain makes the earth wet and then stays there. It soaks the earth, and the earth takes in all that moisture, and it sinks into the earth, and it stays there. God answered, that is no good. Something that comes from the outside and sinks into you and kind of resides in you, that's not what you want, because that would not be a blessing. That is nachmat atzman. That comes as a result of you yourself. You will not have created that rain. That rain will come from the outside as an external blessing. It will enter into you. It will sit there heavily. Maybe it'll do a good job, or maybe it won't. It depends on the season. But you will know. It's not a question of desire anymore. What about the dew? What does dew do? Rak ma'orer et halachot ha'atzmit shel ha'asavim. Now, I don't know about the scientific status of this description of dew. Dew is something that comes and arouses, ma'orer, which is an erotic word, arouses the moisture, the inner moisture of the grass. That is, what does the dew come? It doesn't actually irrigate the grass. It just rests for a moment, suggests moisture, and arouses the inner resources of the grass, of the vegetation, of the earth, and then flies away. Just kind of a fairy presence. It was there, it was here, it did its job of arousing the inner resources, and that's what you want, my dear people, Israel. God is saying to Bnei Israel here, you're wrong when you think you want blessing to come and land in you heavily. That's not transformation. Transformation is something that works with a certain chemistry with what you are, which changes inwardly who you really are and makes you want, makes you very aware of what it is you want. Right? Somewhere that is your life. That is life. That's the moisture that you really want. And it comes, then you're hard put to it to say, did I myself release this moisture, or was it given to me from the outside? Right? It's both. That touch of dew, actually. And what about Abraham's sins? Abraham was so worried about his sins. So our Hasidic master here says it's an extraordinary move. Says your sins were that kind of touch of something that touched you into awareness, touched you into something that you then became aware you had the resources then to deal with. Somewhere you knew about idol worship then, and you began to be active. It activated you in realizing that that's not really what you're looking for. It aroused you. Once you'd experienced it, it aroused you, and then it disappeared from your life. Now, that's very comforting, to be told about the traumas of one's life. that actually they did you good on some level or another. But it depends what you mean by that, right? To say that something that was a curse to you was then replaced by a blessing is not good enough. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is the idea that it's out of the trouble and the intensity of one's reaction to a problem. Out of that, one produces answers. Right? That touches one in some way to produce responses in oneself. It discovers in oneself the trauma of the past, brings to life parts of oneself that one would never have known about, and these then become attuned to the possibility of blessing. Suddenly there then is that very secret language that can be discovered, what I'm calling attunement here. Who is Abraham, therefore? We must finish. Abraham, why was Abraham chosen? Number 11, the Satimet. One more Hasidic source. Lech lecha, go to yourself, your future self, a self that has yet to be touched into being, that is just being touched into being. Lech lecha. Why are we not told what God loved about Abraham that made him choose him? And the answer that the Zohar gives, and the Sfatimet quotes here, is another of these electrifying answers, these answers where a spark will do it. Lech lecha, God says that to everybody all the time. God didn't choose Abraham. God says it to everyone all the time. Abraham heard it. Abraham was troubled by it. Abraham, as the Beis Shalach says, Abraham felt things opening up in himself that removed his stability in a way. It didn't give him stability. It removed his feeling of being comfortable in the world. And acknowledging that about himself, and then going to look for, I don't know if answers is the right expression, but going to look for things to be in tune with, somehow to be in tune with melodies still unheard, ways of being in the world. And so what justifies God in addressing Abraham is no prior knowledge of Abraham. It's not that he knew things about Abraham from the past. All there was about Abraham was really trauma from the past. But he addressed Abraham among others, and his choice was vindicated by the fact that Abraham responded, that Abraham jumped, that he felt himself being looked at. He felt himself, he felt that glance, if you will. I think we'll stop there since time is well and truly up. Is there anyone who's dying to ask a question? Is someone who would really like to ask a question? I'm prepared to stay here for another couple of minutes, if anyone would like to.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, I'm trying to find you.
Okay,
I'm
Faye Goldsmith Silton's husband. Okay, all right. So
okay.
At the very beginning, you sort of, by your choice of translation of Hayei Bracha, in many English translations, it says, and you will be a blessing. But you didn't translate it that way. You translated as be a blessing, okay?
Yes, sir.
And I think that was extremely, I want to know if you did that on purpose, because it puts the thrust of the future in Abraham's hands. That's number one. Number two, you mentioned his hesitation going from place to place. Basically, I think that was symbolic of us having to work out all these conflicts in his personal struggle. It was like a radical self identification with who he was and his place in the world, which I think, from what you said, would involve not only reason and emotion, but once he figured it out and what he had to do, it involved passion.
Thank you so much for reminding me of where I started, Hayeh Bracha, because it really is, as you say, everything we talked about offers in the end a kind of answer to why is Abraham commanded to be a blessing. It's not you will be, it's Hayeh. Hayeh is imperative. And it's as if Abraham is being told, your life is a project. It's an achievement. Lech yourself it's something you now embark on. Go towards yourself. It's not something you can chap right away. You can just get hold of it. And then who will you be a blessing to? The Sforno puts it very beautifully. Be a blessing to me. Now, that's a purely religious bottom line. That is, through your discovery of yourself and certain kinds of relations with other people that have to do with love, you will give me joy. Heye li bracha. Yismach Hashem b'ma'asav. Which is the ideal, I suppose, of God's relation to the world in general. That God will rejoice in his work. God will rejoice in the work of his hands, and Abraham will be a kind of blazing the trail on that particular purpose of blessing. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Yes?
One more question.
Please.
My name is Yafa.
Yes.
We know that Abraham's journey began in Ur Kasdim, where he was born. After a while, he started traveling. Ur Kasdim was in Bavel, quite far away from Haran. So that on the Euphrates River,
The Euphrates.
It was quite far. So the journey from Ur Kasdim to Haran was part of his youth, and later on, even becoming an adult already with Sarah, his wife. And I don't know, the youth agreed that at the point where he breaks all the statues, all the idols, and rejects all the idol work, there is a cut in his life. It's the turning point, that life that he's living now, at that point Hashem sees him as a leadership, and he sees the determination and the agitation that he had, and the severe cut from his father and his previous life brings Hashem to choose him to continue with the journey to Lech Lecha.
Thank you. Thank you. I hear what you say. You're taking a slight pause, but yes. I hear what you're saying.
Okay, thank you. It was very wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and for listening. And I hope thinking your own thoughts as a result. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.